Okay. I shall let people into from the waiting room.
Okay, we'll just wait for people
Yes.
to come into the room and then we'll get started. Okay. We're live on YouTube today and live streaming on Facebook as well. So I can see people in the room with us, so we'll get started. Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to this session with Got it. Okay, I'll start that again. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session with Middleway Words, the online book festival showcasing writers based in the Midlands. This session offers a glimpse behind the scenes into the world of bookselling, and we'll hear from Tamsin, who's an experienced bookseller at Kenilworth Books, and I'm sure many of you will know Tamsin already. So we're going to talk about how books get onto bookshelves, and I'm here because I live in the Midlands. My name's Anna Ganley. I work for the Society of Authors. I'm the head of staff there, and I live in Rugby and have been working with author groups for the last 16, 17 years, and in the Midlands specifically for the last 6 or 7 years. So the Society of Authors is a trade union for writers, illustrators, translators, creators of all kinds, and we exist to support writers and creators in the UK publishing industry by giving business advice. So that's why I'm here today. And before we get to Tamsin's introduction and we dive into the discussion, I've just got a few housekeeping points to get us on our way. As usual with online events, please do stay on mute if you can. And if you have any questions, and I'm sure there'll be many, please pop those into the chat box and we'll pick them up as we go. We have, I think, about 45 minutes today and there'll be a lot of questions. So please just type in whatever's on your mind, what topics you'd like to cover for us to discuss, and we'll get to those as we go. If you do have any technical problems, usually the best way is just to exit the Zoom call and re-enter again, and that usually resolves anything that's audio or visual related. So a bit about Tamsin before we get into the conversation. Tamsin is an artist, historian, broadcaster and bookseller. And after 11 years working in Parliament as a researcher and for the British government at Whitehall, she moved to the city to work in the regulated financial services industry on analysis and corporate communications. After a few years in Brussels, she returned to England to join the team at English Heritage, which was then part of DCMS. While retaining her interest in economics and public policy, Tamsin now works for the 55-year-old independent bookshop, which deserves a round of applause in itself, Kenilworth Books, which I'm sure many of you have been into, and she's been a bookseller there for nearly 15 years now. So in addition to all of this, Tamsin also gives freelance lectures on the history of ghost law, history of perfume, the history of chocolate, and that's the best bit. And it's at this point where I'm really sad that we're not doing an in-person event, because Tamsin makes the best chocolate and biscuits for events that I've ever tasted. So Sadly, we're online. You'll have to pop into the bookshop at some point, and there might be biscuits on the table. If that isn't enough, she also lectures on Elizabethan horticulture. She paints and exhibits her work, and the work she tells me has been used for album cover designs, posters, music videos, as well as published as illustration. So I don't know how she finds time to do it all, but she's an absolute powerhouse, and she has a widely followed Twitter account, which you might be aware of, which publishers follow closely. So hello, Tamsin, how are you?
Hi, Anna. Thank you very much. Yeah, I actually, when I was in Belgium, I used my time well. I trained as a chocolatier when I was there. Which one of my directors at English Heritage said, "Oh, that makes you very employable." Translation, please make me chocolate.
Yes.
I do regularly for those who know me. So
yeah, so thank you for coming along today.
Pleasure. It's nice to be here.
We're hoping that the internet gods will play nicely and we'll have a nice stable internet connection. So we've got about 45 minutes for a discussion, and we'll keep an eye on that chat box. We've got lots to get through, so let us know in the chat box what specifically you'd like to find out. Firstly, I kind of thought we'd just have a quick chat about how the bookshop's doing now, how you manage through lockdowns, and how you're managing now that restrictions are lifted. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, probably. The short answer is it's busier than ever, and we had, probably our best year ever last year for about the 5th year running. So progressively getting stronger and stronger. So I don't know what Sebastian Faulks is on about, if I'm honest, saying the bookshops have been quiet, because ours certainly hasn't been. I think we do have, Kenilworth Books is, for those of you who do know it, it is physically tiny. It's a very small space. Publishers often turn up, look around and say, well, where's the rest of it? And the answer is the rest of it usually in my phone, because we use our social media, we use our website, for bookselling as well as for building those relationships. It's really been busier than ever. I think people have been buying books, and we've had the huge advantage in being smaller of being incredibly agile. And I think this is where actually it's been an easier market for us and for independent bookshops than it has, say, for Waterstones, which, I can have an idea at 3 in the morning and text Judy at 7, and by the time we both get in at 9, we can put it into action. You can't do that if you own 250 stores. That's really, really hard. So a lot of what we've been doing during that period and afterwards is actually talking about how important the high street is, the high street book selling. That includes an element of online, because we've got our individual websites. You could include social media within that. And Waterstones has got its own website, Blackwell's has got its own website. But actually, I think from an author's point of view, from an illustrator's point of view, I think we really need to not lose that high street element. We should not be driving stuff online when it's got nothing to do with a bookshop. So people talk about Waterstones and independents as being kind of competitors, and that's just not what we see. We see them as fellow booksellers on the high street.
And do you often work with other bookstores or collaborate or share ideas and
all the time. We talk to other booksellers pretty much constantly. I mean, if you looked at our Twitter account at Kenilworth Books, for example, you can see us following a lot of other independent bookshops, a lot of Waterstones. They follow us. We talk about books. There's a lot of banter that goes on between us. I'm doing an event with Penguin Live with Caroline Criado Perez, and I've just had the notification through. So she's doing a tour with four venues. 3 of them are hosted by Waterstones, and the other one is with us. So yeah, we've all got the information about tickets. So we all know how many books we're dealing with. So yes, all the time. I pass people on to Waterstones if we haven't got a book, but our local Waterstones, they're still booksellers. They've got a book and we haven't. I'd rather help the customer.
How important do you find Twitter, just with you speaking about it there, for kind of your conversations with publishers or with authors or with other booksellers? Do you find that's your main?
Vital. Yeah, it's absolutely vital. And Instagram is becoming as important for us too. There are so many books published today, and I think those authors who are watching, if you're a little bit skeptical about using social media, I think to see it from a bookseller's point of view might be quite helpful. I think Penguin alone is publishing somewhere between 200 and 500 books a month, depending on the time of year. that's an awful lot of books. That's one publisher. If you multiply that by 5 for the large publishing houses and then add in about 650 small publishers, that's an awful lot of books for a bookseller to have to wade through. I totally rely on being able to see the books that people are talking about, the books that, you know, that sound right for our bookshop. And one of the ways I do that is looking on Twitter and Instagram, but particularly Twitter. So,
that actually picks a question up from the chat box about, because independent bookstores, it's very much about your personal tastes and what you see and what you choose to stock. So does your own reading taste come into what you choose to put on the bookshelves? How do you think your stock varies to other independent bookshops, and what kind of factors come into it for you when you're deciding on what books to stock?
This is one thing I think I really wish publishers understood better, is that we're an independent bookshop, but is in the name. I think when we choose what works for our bookshop, we know our customer base. The bookshop's existed for 55 years. I've been there for 15 of them. You know, my colleagues are all really experienced booksellers and have varying backgrounds from education to banking too. We know our customers. We know what is going to work in the bookshop. Just because, you know, ex-publisher thinks that they really want us to take on a book does not mean that book is going to work in our shop. To actually answer the question directly about my own reading tastes, the very clear answer is no, it doesn't, and it shouldn't. You know, I'm very conscious that just because I don't like a book or don't like a writer's way of writing doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not for me. And we come across this every day, that, you know, I actually work on a lot of children's books, but and to be perfectly honest with you, I've never made it more than 4 chapters into anything Neil Gaiman has written. I just cannot read it. I feel like I'm stumbling over cobbles. I cannot read his way of writing. That doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, it's obviously demonstrably not bad. It just means it's not for me. And there are many thousands, millions of people who love that. You know, I think I've got a responsibility as a bookseller to ensure that I've got that work in, and by many other authors as well, whether I like it or not. So yeah, it doesn't come into it what my personal taste is really.
And how important is the cover? Do you judge books by their covers? Is that important for you as a bookseller?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time, constantly. And I think it's something when we come to, you know, self-published books as well, I think this is really important to get this right. A good cover design is the difference between, can easily be the difference between a book being a success and not being the success it should be. And one of the books that, you know, I talk about quite often is an absolutely astonishing piece of writing, Jessica Townsend's Nevermore series. It's a remarkable piece of work. It's really, you know, one of the best pieces of writing I've read in a decade. And yet the cover design put on by the publisher looks like it is, you know, a slightly silly book for an 8-year-old girl, and it's not particularly gendered as a book. It's got a much older readership, right into adult, perhaps more like you know, what Philip Pullman has been writing, perhaps more like the way Harry Potter was treated early on, where it had the adult covers and the children's covers, and it was recognized that the quality of this was bigger. And I think the choice of that cover has really diminished my ability to sell that book as broadly as I think I should be able to for the quality of the writing. It's also the difference, a cover design is also the difference between whether I might choose a book for a window display or whether I might just choose to stock it or support it in another way. So yeah, the cover designs, the colours, the use of foils is definitely something that we look at.
So when you mentioned self-published authors there, and they would be directly responsible for their covers, and do you want to talk a little bit about how you work with self-published authors and their books, if you do in your bookstore? How would that work for you? What kind of processes would you think about if you were thinking about taking a self-published book onto your shelves, if you would?
Yeah, I think if you'd asked me this question 8 years ago, I think the answer would have been a general, do we take self-published books? A general reluctant yes. Because I think at that point it was kind of recognised that a lot of it was vanity publishing. A lot of it was markedly lower quality than what was coming out from traditional publishing, from small publishers as well as from large ones. And actually that's just not the case anymore. I think what we're seeing now is that self-publishing is not one thing. that one of the best selling areas of our shop is local history. We've got 2 full bays of local history, and with somewhere like Kenilworth, we've got masses of stuff from everything from the Second World War right the way back to John of Gaunt. So and almost all of that is either published by very tiny presses, specialist presses, or self-published locally. And I would never dismiss that. And so that's one side of it. Another side is where you get more hybrid models, which combine some of those elements of traditional publishing with self-publishing, where the author wants to be able to move it forward. And 2 of the best that we work with are Unbound and Red Door Books, both of whom I think have got really interesting models and they're both producing some really remarkable books and have brought to light some fantastic authors and brought them into the shop. But there is still this element of vanity publishing. If you're writing particularly fiction, particularly adult fiction, I think children's fiction as well, and you haven't been through a rigorous editorial process, you haven't had, any sense of professional art design on it, you've just got a friend to illustrate it, somebody whose picture you quite like, or your mate from university read it and said it was amazing, that doesn't count. I think that's where it's a problem for us, is that yes, we do take them on, but people sort of somehow think that once their book is in a bookshop, it'll just fly off the shelves, and actually that's just not the reality of it at all. You've got to work it hard, and it isn't us who does that, that's the author.
I think with it being such a creative process, I think it's hard to get back to the reality of this is a business, and you need to do your research, and you need to see what works in your area of writing or area of whether it's short stories, as someone's mentioned in the chat box there, or poetry or novels, and really do your market research and find out what's going to work for your book in your area of writing, and it really need to be business minded, and separating yourself from that creative side sometimes.
It is. One of the things, Anna, that I think isn't helping is that we've got a dialogue within the creative industries about reading for pleasure. We've got a dialogue of, people can paint for pleasure. There's no pressure. People can create music for pleasure. There's no particular pressure that what you must be doing is striving to become a concert pianist, or, to become, exhibited in the Tate Gallery. That doesn't really exist. There are many more outlets than that. But what we don't have is a strong dialogue about writing for pleasure. And I think people do still feel that if they want to write, they need to write, they've loved to write, that somehow they ought to aspire to be being published. And with so many books published today, I do find that I read an awful lot of books which are fine. They're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. Many people will probably quite enjoy them, but often they're quite derivative of other texts that already exist. And I would like to see the idea that we can write for pleasure brought more to the fore, to try and move it more into a business sense, that we actually, if the book's coming into the shop, you have to be able to sell it. If you're the self-published author and you've invested a lot of money in that, and someone's told you that this is what you ought to be doing, and you lose your money, it doesn't go as you had been led to believe it would, I think that is then a problem. And why we don't say to people, just do it, just write for pleasure.
Again, I'll pick up a few questions from the chat box, and I know talking there about the sheer volume of books published each year, we'll talk a bit about what authors can do for themselves in terms of that marketing promotion, but picking up on these questions from the chat box, have you noticed any difference in people's reading habits over the course of the pandemic? And related to that, in your store, have you seen more sales of short story collections? Do you sell short story collections? And how do you see those being positioned in your store specifically?
We do. We have short story collections. We've got a section for short stories. I love short stories. I think they're kind of not a publishing fashion at the moment, and I'd really like to see that changed, because I think short stories are fantastic. I've always loved short stories, from M.R. James through to Saki, through to those sort of granted collections of short stories. I love them as a child, I love them as an adult, and I think we don't have anywhere near enough short stories. I'd really like to see more published. I'd like to see that brought out.
I just wondered whether us all having shorter attention spans, well, not all, a lot of us, whether short story collections did well during the pandemic. I know short stories were great because you've got that kind of the concentration and think, right, yes, I can complete this, it's achievable.
Yeah.
But
I think things did change during the pandemic, or we noticed. So during that last couple of lockdowns over that period, so really up until maybe April this year, I sat through a lot of publisher presentations on Zoom, and the number of publishers, both small and large, who were trying to foist onto me really grim dystopian YA or adult stuff, really tear-jerking, kind of emotionally intense. Oh my God, it was relentless. And actually, we'd already recognized that was just not where the market was. So the book we chose to reopen with a full window display was Tamsin Rosewell's book, The Weather Weaver. Yes. Which is bright, it's fun, it's about island folklore and magic, and it's a really fun adventure, and that sold to children and to adults in abundance. So that's where the market was at that moment. People want that kind of
escapism, and going somewhere else.
No one walks into a bookshop and says, oh, my child is really struggling and has struggled through lockdown, and they've been quite down. I'd like to give them something really miserable, please, but like something really, really hard and challenging. No one does that. So I don't quite know where this came from in publishing houses, but they just misjudged that market.
My daughter's just finished The Exploding Life of Scarlet Fife, and she riveted. Look, that's just what she needed at that point in time, and it's just like finding the right book at the right time is so important, because we need.
I think that's a lot of what we do, is finding that right book at the right time. And I think I can notice that somebody's asked about, do we look out for books from certain publishers? There's certainly publishers that I keep my eye on, definitely, and that kind of goes in cycles. But it's more about just picking out, and very often it just leaps out at you what is the right book, and it'll be the right book for us. It might not be the right book for a different independent bookshop, it might not be the right book for Waterstones, it might not be the right book for Blackwell, but it's the right book for us at that moment. That's what I'm looking for. Definitely.
So in terms of your relationship with authors, what kind of interaction would you encourage? There's a question here, just picking that up from the chat box. Do writers send you your manuscripts? What approaches work well for you as a bookstore, and what are the do's and don'ts? What would you recommend, and what would you ask?
Okay, I sometimes feel that when I work with authors, that particularly if we've got to know them maybe through the Golden Egg Academy or through the Society of Authors, when they've just got their contract, when they're at the beginning of their journey, that I imagine that I'm at one side of the bridge and they're on the other side of the bridge, and there's this huge raging river between us, which is called publishing, and somehow we've got to continue to find each other across that. And it does feel that there is this gap, and we really like to talk to authors. We like to get to know them. Often authors put us in contact with other authors. I'll get messages that say, from somebody I've worked with a while ago, saying, oh, my friend's got this book out, I think it's just the right book for you, I think you're going to love it, because they've got to know us. And I think that's the key, is get to know us. When you get to meet the individual characters who are working in a bookshop, and when you know us well enough to know that we love our ghost stories, we have fun at Halloween, we love illustrated books for adults and for children, we're passionate about illustration, we've really championed illustration. When you know that about us, it's kind of easier to find the route through whether your book is the right book for us, or whether it might be better placed with somebody else. So get to know us, because we're really not all the same. So in terms of the manuscripts, it's Linda Sargent who asked that. They try to, Linda, they try to all the time. I get messages pretty much constantly from writers at all stages, actually, established writers as well as, maybe aspiring writers, who are on their first manuscripts. My answer to them is always the same, which is, I'm not an editor. That is not my skill. If you I'm really happy to look at something for you, but I won't be commenting on it, because I don't have the skill of an editor. I don't have the experience in a publishing house, and I will encourage them to find an editor to look at that text, find some kind of service that they can work with that way, or some group.
So do you find you do a lot of signposting as a community bookseller? Do authors come in looking for help and advice? on
Yeah,
what
we
to do
do. We
next?
do. People come in. We point them to the Society of Authors pretty much constantly. Authors do come in and ask us to help. If we look over contracts. I'm a bookseller. The Booksellers Association has a part on their website about how to get your book stocked in local bookshops, which is a really good introduction. So I'm always emailing that to people. What else can I say? Yeah, we encourage people to join groups to look at organisations like Scooby and the and Golden Egg Academy. If we feel they're right for them. We encourage that constantly. We're always signposting people, because I think often the bookshop is physically there. You can walk in and say, hi, can you help me? And very often we can, but not in the way that they're expecting.
Yeah. I think I'll look for that link to the bookseller guide. If not, search it up on the website, but that's a great introduction if you're wanting to find about all the nuts and bolts about how to find your local bookseller and work with them. So looking back again to the chat box, and Linda Newbury has asked about whether you think people are beginning to value independent bookshops more as they realise the limitations of change and appreciate the individual attention that you can give. And just connected, because Linda did write another question: have you noticed a surge in interest in nature writing due to lockdown as well? So two different questions there.
Yeah, okay, so let's start. I think they've always valued independent bookshops, and this is where I've got a huge problem with a lot of the rhetoric that we create as an industry about independent bookshops. You see a lot of it coming out of the Booksellers Association, which is our own trade association, which is using words like support, and generally talks about, and that they did a whole campaign so the idea that we wouldn't pay any rates, and just the idea of us being treated like charities, I think, is very problematic. If you take that, why me and why not the gallery down in the old town? They're just as valuable culturally in the town. They're work just as hard as we do. I think but you've got to work at it. I think I find it really troublesome when I see booksellers doing the kind of oh woe is me, oh it's really hard, I do wish people would buy books, please buy from me. I think you've got to work that. You've really got to push it very hard. You've got to be commercial. You've got to recognize that you need to be commercial. There's not a reason in the world why an independent bookshop should not be commercially and financially successful and also be part of the community. And what that means, we're a successful, financially successful independent bookshop, and that enables us, the fact that we make a profit. People just think of profit as a dirty word, but that profit goes into our local festival. So we use that money to bring more into the town. We use that money to bring authors into the town, so they, these authors then get paid to attend a festival. And I think, isn't that what we want? We really want. We don't use language about supporting. We use be part of your local bookshop. Yeah. And I think this goes back to what I'd say to authors: how you'd work with a bookshop. Really get to know them. I think don't be that author who walks in, having and says, I haven't been in for 10 years, but I've got a book out, next week. Please don't do that. Learn about us, engage, because you'll meet other authors.
So for those people who don't know the bookshop, Kenilworth Books, and you and Judy, what kind of event, in a nutshell, what kind of events and activities do you get involved with throughout the year to be part of the community and to work with your local community through events and festivals and things? Do you have an ongoing program, or I know at current circumstances a lot of things have moved online, but do you have a regular program of activities that go on, and do you find that you have that regular community of readers and authors who work with you over the course of your events?
Yeah, we will do anything really. If we feel like doing it, we will do it. And really that is everything from partly creating and being the major sponsor of an arts festival for our town, which was started from scratch about 5 years ago, and we've managed to kind of keep going through the pandemic by hook or by crook. From that to, we've used our profit to completely renovate the area outside the bookshop. So those of you familiar with Kenilworth, the area literally outside the bookshop was rubble. It was a rubble car park after a group of buildings were demolished. We, gathered teams of volunteers together, used our contacts and network to secure grants, worked with the arts festival, with other local groups, and it's now absolutely blossoming. We've planted stuff for bees and for pollinators of all sorts. It looks absolutely amazing now, and that's, so we'll do anything from one extreme to the other. So yeah.
And I was also saying, we were chatting about earlier in that bookshops not always the most accessible of places. How do you mitigate that for your customers? I was noticing Linda in the chat box there was saying that her local bookstore mails out her books to her, and it helps that the owner lives in the village. But one thing that I found during the lockdowns is that our local independent bookstore, they were so much more visible than before, and they were bringing books to your door, and it just, that community spirit came alive. And so it seemed that we were engaging more because you want to help each other out, and that community spirit was amazing.
I think we do absolutely all of that. We've got a lot of older customers in Kenilworth, and there are a number of care homes and sort of residential properties around. So we've always had a huge proportion of customers who we regularly deliver to. Direct answer to Linda's question about physical space. Yes, our bookshop is tiny as well. We're very lucky. Our book, it's completely flat throughout. We're on a level. We're in a modern building. It's a very unattractive 1960s building, so we just make the most of it. It means that we don't have, the staircases and the narrow corridors that older, more beautiful bookshops have, but it does mean that we can make it that bit more accessible. So we do all of that, of course. Yes, that's part of the fun. Yeah.
And you definitely make the most of it by your window displays. How do you decide what to put in a window display? I mean, do publishers have a say in what or do they ask you to put certain books in displays, and could they persuade you to feature a certain book, or is that down to you and your personal choice and what you think would work at that point in time?
They can try, but it's always my choice, never anything but. I look for particular things in the window. It has to work for us for a start. If I would never pick out a book that I didn't think would sell for us, and I didn't think I'd be able to support the author and the publisher in doing that. Because of the way the windows are physically, the light hits them very hard, and bright books with foils on the front, with strong central designs work really, really well. There are loads of other books that I adore and do loads to support, but I would never put them in the window. So, for example, Thornhill, Pam Smythe's Thornhill, I think is one of the most astonishing books ever. I love it. We've always got it on the shelf. I've done masses to support it, but I would never put it in the window. It's matte, it's black. You put it behind glass and you cannot see it. There's no point in me doing that. I will do something else.
So very practical elements to the decision.
There are really practical elements. There is a huge element, and I'm always happy to talk about this because I think it's often misunderstood. There are loads of great books out. If I'm faced with a decision, let's say I've got 3 or 4 books, all of which are fantastic, all those authors deserve that support, and I'm trying to choose a window display. I also look for other things. So the attitude of the publisher, and this is not any author's fault at all ever, if your publisher happens to be one who doesn't bother to retweet stuff and build relationships online, if your publisher is one that has a slack moral attitude to various stuff, and we might face criticism on that, I will just remove that book from the thing. There's no point in me doing that. The other thing I look for is whether the author is on social media and is using it.
I was just going to say, how much of it can an author kind of regain or recover that relationship with you for themselves on social media? Is that something that you would engage directly with?
It doesn't mean I wouldn't support that book. It just means that So often, if you look at our window displays, often I put publishers' logos in. I draw the publishers' logos in as part of the display. If for whatever reason I don't wish to be associated with a publisher, and this is the kind of flip side of social media, is that, you know, if we've got a strong presence on social media and you really use it for your business, you also don't want to be associated with those publishing houses which, you know, for which you might come under fire. We've had people criticizing our customers who are online with us for picking up on that, you know, in conversations with publishers. I just don't want to go there. And I totally recognise that that's not an author's fault, and it's tragic and it's a horrific thing to have to decide. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean I wouldn't do something else to support that book, or, you know, constantly be supporting it on Twitter. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess that comes back to the reality of the business decisions that you need to make for the business, for the bookstores. So it comes back to commercial decisions.
One of the things about the window displays is that people don't perhaps often get is that the purpose of them is those photographs. It's really nice for the people who walk past and see the pretty pictures, but actually what I want to do at that moment is create something that the author and the publisher and maybe the illustrator can all use to boost themselves, to boost their book. You know, maybe they can put those pictures on the website, they can use those images to, you know, get leverage with their own publishing house or other publishing houses if they want to say, well, look, you know, look what I got. I got, you know, a whole window display for my last book here. Maybe, you know, often agents pick up on that kind of thing. We're very aware that agents do that.
And that's where it can be a really lovely two-way relationship. So it's if the author then at that point hasn't got any social media and doesn't use it at all, and the publisher can't be bothered, that's when I'll also decide, actually, it's not that I don't like that book. It's not that I've decided that book is better or worse than another book. Often you can't decide between the books, but I think that this author will be able to use my effort more. You know, it's quite a lot of effort to create a whole display for a book or create an event for a book. You know, I'd like to know that the author will be able to use that and really make the most of it. So whether that's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, do you have a preference? Do you prefer the kind of the Twitter?
And I wouldn't ever want an author to think that they had to have a massive following either. It's really not relevant. There was one book that I did a window display for a smaller publisher, a fantastic book, but the author was not on social media, and his wife very quickly set up a social media account for this book. And I was a bit, you know, I thought, oh, you know, I'm not really sure about this. But I was totally wrong. She did an absolutely astonishing job. She was brilliant. She built the following. She really used it well. I cannot fault what she did. I was also, you know, skeptical about the idea of just a wife doing it. I thought, well, you know, okay, it's not what wives should be doing, but
giving it a go and making it work and doing so, using the creativity and being innovative and just making it work for that book. Would you stock books for a signing, for an event, or would you need to
say that again?
I was just thinking about events for authors. Would you stock a book just for the signing and for reading, or would you, or if you were working with an author in an event, how often do you do signings and readings in usual times when we can? But
in a normal year, pretty much constantly. And again, this is one thing that there's all kinds of stuff that goes on within that. I think a signing isn't one thing. We took to doing something which we called our Saturday signings, when the shop is busy anyway on a Saturday. We just get the author, we get a pile of their books. You know, we put them, you know, on a nice table that we've set up at the front of the shop. And we encourage people to talk to them. They, you know, if they're kind of willing to be a little bit outgoing and engage people in conversation, they can do really well. That's one way of doing it. We've allowed authors to come in and not quite host a private party, but it's really nice if you want to have a book launch and you want, you know, all the people that you know locally to come along. It's quite nice to have it at a bookshop. We're always happy to open our doors for that and be the hosts. That's something that we do. Then we'll do, you know, major events for 1,000 people at Coventry Cathedral and anything in between.
Yes,
that's really one thing.
Yeah, I mean, you do an amazing number and breadth of events, from the large scale events, as you mentioned, the cathedral events there, and I've been to a couple of them, and down to those more intimate events. And I don't think there's a better place to hold a book launch than in a bookstore, and because they have so much atmosphere and they're intimate, and getting all of your local community involved and behind them as well. If you, what kind of innovative approaches or have you noticed from authors that have really worked well? Do you say kind of just really engaging with customers and talking to them about their book? And
I think again, I was discussing this with an author not so long ago, that I think it must be really hard if you're particularly a fiction writer, and the process of writing a novel is by its nature quite solitary. It's very personal. I think even when you're going through the edit stage, when you're perhaps working one-to-one with an editor, you're hearing bits from an art director maybe. And then suddenly when your book is published, you're suddenly expected to be really social and chatting and turning up everywhere smiling. And I think that's a huge leap for an author to have to make. And by their nature, some are great at it and some really struggle with it. And I think that's the point often at which a bookseller can really help you, is that, you know, I can often step in and almost be that enthusiasm if I know that an author is going to struggle to get there at that point, or is perhaps less of a social creature, is often the bookshop, you know, can do that element for them. But the one thing I would counsel authors to do is really just take the time to get to know the bookshops, local bookshops.
I'll say that enough,
and Waterstones vary across the country because they're booksellers, because, you know, some of the teams are really strong and have got passionate booksellers in them. Other teams are more modest, you know, and just because your local bookshop, I think someone's made a comment that they stopped supporting local books. That might just be that bookstore, because, you know, our stores in Coventry and Leamington locally and Stratford-upon-Avon, you know, have all been great with their local authors. I think, you know, I've actually popped in some of them almost on the author's behalf, because it's too embarrassing for them to have to do, and to say, you know, you haven't got these books out, you know, they're published and they've got them in, there's not a problem with it. So
everything starts with a conversation, doesn't it? And I think being brave enough to go in and have that conversation, just find out about that individual store and what their decision-making process is and what they can and can't do, understand a bit more about what is possible. Okay. Pausing there for, we've got another 10 minutes, I think, on in this session. So if anyone who's watching this live, if there's anything we haven't covered that you'd really like to find out about, please ask that now, so that we don't overlook it, and anything that we don't get to, you can email us after. So we'll keep chatting a little while. I just want to make sure that anything you're thinking about that's come up during the course of the talk, that we get to for you, to make this really useful. Can
I just talk a bit more about, you know, authors and that social media thing, because I kind of understand that it's a tricky one, because, you know, you ought to be able to just be a writer, and I think in theory that's quite important, that, you know, you should be able to just be a great writer and that's it. But actually the reality is that more is expected of you now, and whatever level you're at, really, almost practically, that you know, you're kind of, one author said to me, he said, I can't just be a writer anymore, I'm also expected to be, you know, have opinions on this and opinions on that, and to be campaigning for school libraries and to be campaigning for, you know, all sorts of other stuff. But what goes along with that is a huge amount more energy, the ability to reach much bigger, broader audiences, reach areas, you know, which you couldn't otherwise have reached, maybe. And the same goes for a bookshop, is that, you know, because of our social media, we're able to sell all over the country. Our customers are not just in Kenilworth, we sell right across the country all the time. There isn't really one place, you know, apart from the people who come in, which is particular to us. But find your tribe. I think find other authors who support you and support them. You know, and I noticed this with groups like the Golden Egg Academy and Scooby, that if you notice that when an author's got a book out, all the others within that network will race to support them and share their stuff.
And that's what I was just going to say, because if you're in that support network, then even if you feel a bit uncomfortable promoting your own work online, if you can shout loudly about each other's work, then it takes a little bit of the pressure off, because it's easier to to say lovely things about other people's work, but then when it comes to your own, you think, oh, should I be doing this?
It is a big leap to make. I mean, I always butting into conversations where an author said, oh, I don't know how to, promote my own book. I don't know what to do. I feel dreadful doing it. Never, ever be apologetic about promoting your book. I need you as a bookseller. I need you to be telling me about your book. You've worked on that book often for years. You are allowed to be proud of it. You are allowed to promote it. It's perfectly acceptable. And I need you to do it. How else am I going to find out about your book in the cacophony that is the British book industry?
Genuinely interested and want to know what you've been working on. What's it about? Tell us more about it. And if you're the best, as the author, best place to do that and do it proudly. Because there is so much, as you say, noise and with people being on social media. Do you think that trend do you think that's here to stay? Do you think that will change at all? Or do you think that is part of the writer's life, illustrator's life, is you have to be online to be visible as widely as possible?
I don't know the answer to that, and I think that's not really for me to decide. That's probably not really for us to decide. I think what will happen. Actually,
speculating here.
When one thing that publishers do all the time is that if a book is a success, they mimic it, until it peters out. So there was one year after the success of The Girl on the Train where the title of every other bloody book was The Something Girl, or had the word girl in the title. And then we had The Something Wife as well after the success of another book. And you think, oh my God, after the success of The Boy, the Fox, the Horse and the Mole, or whatever it's called, there's half a dozen others which are like it. And in all of my experience, never has any one of those copycat titles, whatever, been anywhere near as successful as the original one. And the truth is that when you get a book that is a phenomenal success, that really rides the storm that is, the world at that moment, it comes from left field. You can't really predict which is the one that's going to catch the zeitgeist. And I don't quite know why they mimic it. So, and often, it's often those books have come from somebody's Instagram account, or, those books are created by an illustrator who's built their name up elsewhere. But not always. I don't think and it hasn't always been the case. It's a relatively new thing, and we've managed perfectly well in the past. So I think probably the answer is no, but it might be. I don't really know. It depends what happens next.
Yeah. You'd want your book to be the next big thing, rather than jumping on the kind of the trend, the current trend, which, as you say, they don't tend to do as well as the first of its kind. Getting back to the commercial side of running a bookstore and picking up on a question about how you make the bookstore work. How do you make a profit? How do you turn a profit? I mean, that's always going to be the first and foremost in your mind as a bookstore, and in all the decisions that you make.
One of the things I think we do things for all kinds of reasons, and I think we strive to work as a bookshop. I think we've something like 70+% of independent bookshops are run by families or couples. And at that point, it is a slightly different thing. Again, this is where it comes in that we're all independent, we're all different. If you're running a bookshop as a couple and you decide you want to take August off, it's fine. You just decide that's what you're going to do. If you need to tighten your belt, if it's a lifestyle choice that you want a quieter life after the thing, it's a different thing from somebody stepping in, employing a group of people to whom they are not related or in a relationship of any kind, and making that work for them and being a good employer. That's a really different thing. So our profits have gone up year on year. The current owner, so I've seen 3 different owners of this bookshop, and the current owner, Judy Brooke, is fantastic, and has really turned the bookshop around from one that the previous owners were more or less, had they not been able to sell it, probably would have just sold off the stock and closed it down. And she's turned it into a really profitable, strong local business. And we do that in all kinds of ways. I mean, I could talk you through how our profits are structured. About 10-15% of what our revenue comes from cards and gifts, which I understand that it depends slightly on the time of year. That's about the same as Waterstones would be if you think about what they've got in store as well. other bookshops sell more. Other bookshops have got cafes involved in them. We don't. You know, I can think of a number of independent bookshops that are more cafe than bookshop, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
It varies massively. I just think if you're relying on people, you know, completely giving their time for free, it's just a very different thing. It doesn't make it better or worse. It's you know, it's not necessarily a business as such, but there's no reason why it has to be.
I was just thinking, if for those people who are lucky enough to live near Kenilworth Books, do pop in and have a look just at how much is going on. And if you don't, then I know that we've talked a lot about your window displays and how important they are to the business. I know you've just started a new Instagram account. Is it okay if I share that for listeners? Have a look at Kenilworth Book if you're on Twitter, and then there'll be links to see the marvellous bookshop windows that Tamsin has created. And they're beautiful pieces of art. They're beautiful in their own right. And I just love browsing through your feed and on Instagram there as well at Hobbs_Lantern. I'm an eye on the time. I'm aware we're probably just about there with time. Would you, as a one more question you wanted to take?
I was going to pick up on the window displays. You're just saying that's quite a good example of how we use our social media. So years ago, I set up an Instagram account for the bookshop, mainly because I felt I ought to. I didn't really know how it worked or anything like that, but I kind of felt I ought to do it. And we started, because it's very image led, we started using it really just for our window displays. That seemed the sensible thing. And then we got a new team member in, Charlotte Vaughan, who is fantastic and really wanted to take on Instagram. And she now runs, we've got a virtual book club that runs off Instagram, and she set it up as a shop as well. So there's a shop aspect to our Instagram, and she runs as a book group, discussion group, which is again national, indeed international, which meant that it kind of pushed the window displays out a little bit, but we still wanted that space. So I set up a separate Twitter account, which is Hobbs Lantern, which we're just showcasing really some of the window displays, which gives me a chance to promote those. Here we go, it's the photographs. Because I've got the Instagram account, what I can do is promote all those authors again. Yeah. I've done over the last few years. I can share the links, I can share the pictures of their books, the displays that we did for them, give them another boost. It's really important that they're using those tools as well to enable me to do that. I can't do it for them if they're not using the tools. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And when you give them such magical gifts of a window display like that, then it's really something that no one gets bored of seeing those window displays. So hopefully.
And they cycle for years. I did one for Michelin maps at one point, which involved making a ball gown out of old maps, which kind of swirled around the window. And 4 years later, the rep from Michelin came in. He said, I was in Zurich at the conference, and the photographs of your window display came up. And I said, well, what window display? I haven't done a window display for you for years. He said, the one with the map dress. So that was 4 years ago.
Iconic.
And still, they're still using it to promote their own books. And this is what I mean, is that it's nice for me. It sells your book in my shop for a little bit, but you can use it for much, much longer. Your publisher can use it for much, much longer.
Yeah, it then becomes a marketing asset in commercial terms for the publisher.
Those images are yours as much as they're mine.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much, Tamsin. I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm just checking to see if we had any other questions, but there's just lovely comments in the chat box that I hope you're reading. Thank you for coming along to share your insights and experience. Really enjoyed getting behind the scenes of the bookshop. Also, thank you to Middleway Words for inviting us along. I love having a chat with Tamsin. There's always too much to chat about. We could go on all afternoon, but thank you everybody for tuning in today. I know the sun is shining outside, so thank you for being indoors with us today if you are, but I hope you found this session useful. Enjoy the rest of the festival. I'm looking forward to next year's festival as well. It's been fantastic to see this festival come together. So congratulations to all of the organisers for the festival, and have a lovely afternoon in the sunshine.